Okay, all set. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to one of the first sessions of the conference today. My name is Mark Hogan. I'm going to be chairing this session, and a particular warm welcome to all our presenters this morning. Great to see you all, and thank you for your submissions. And we're really looking forward to your presentations and the sort of Q&A and conversations afterwards. It'll be great. So we've got three sessions running this morning. Each session's around about 20 minutes. We'll have sort of 10 minutes for questions and answers after that. And then we'll take it from there. So what I'd like to do, you're here to hear other people talk, not me. So I'd just like to introduce our first set of speakers. You can see their slides there already. So a warm welcome to Alina, Samantha and Nazgul, who are going to be presenting on a mixed method study of lived experiences of student migrants studying medical degrees in Kazakhstan. So welcome, and over to you. Can I just remind delegates just to keep your microphones silent just while we're listening to the presentation, then turn them on for all Q&A. And please feel free to use the chat. And if you have a question afterwards, please raise your hand and we'll get round to you as well. Over to you all. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. So what we're going to talk about a little bit today, you can just see our outline there. We're just going to give you a little bit of background context to sort of the research, a little bit of information about Kazakhstan more specifically. My colleague Alina is going to talk a little bit more specifically about our research questions, the design, participant profiles and questionnaire data. I'll talk a little bit about the qualitative research, and Alina and Nazgul may sort of jump in a little bit on conclusions as well. Okay, so I'm sure many people are quite familiar already with this literature. But obviously, we're really aware that much of the current research has really focused on student migrants as quite sort of a privileged and transnational group. We know that generally the research considers student migrants much more in sort of a south to north trajectory, or an east to west conceptualization, which are, the ones that are most typical in the literature. We know that there's a real sort of danger and concern ultimately that actually the literature can homogenize students and actually neglects much of their sort of experience in terms of factors such as gender, ethnicity, or socioeconomic background. So ultimately, this is part of a larger study across a number of countries, but ultimately what we're presenting today really is this sort of focus addressing a gap really in the literature, looking at sort of Indian student migrants studying in Kazakhstan. We're very keen to obviously frame our student migrants as sort of agentic, but actually trying to understand their adjustment and sort of illuminate how they sort of ultimately effectively shape their educational sojourn. Okay, so in terms of the research context then, I think it's fair to say that we're aware that following the fall of the Soviet Union, internationalization became quite a strategic priority within Kazakhstan, partly to support nation building, but also to sort of grow the country's sort of economic capital, but also to think about how it enhanced its international reputation in terms of its higher education institutions. And we also know that much of that is focused on sort of offering English medium programs, and we know that there's sort of a really popular move to study for a medical degree in Kazakhstan. In terms of its competitiveness, sort of cost of entry to medical degrees. And actually sort of, really quite an attractive option for a number of reasons, which we'll explore a little bit more in terms of our findings. I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Alina now.
Thanks, Sam. I hope you can hear me all okay. So I'll just briefly talk you through our research questions. So as Sam said, we were really keen to take a critical approach, very aware of wanting to capture the whole migration trajectory really of the students, which is why we started using the term student migrants. So for a while we used the term international students in our research, but I think we're increasingly shifting to using the notion student migrants, just because it is kind of more inclusive and acknowledges that there is something that happens before as well as after in terms of their experience. So the questions, you see them on the slide here. So we were interested in the practices of these Indian student migrants in Kazakhstan and how their practices shape their adjustment. And then also we wanted to measure, as much as you can measure these things, which factors, if any, contribute to their academic, psychological, and sociocultural adaptation. So we're kind of interested in the sort of process over time, which is the adjustment, as well as some measures, towards the end of the sojourn, or sort of in the middle, depending on where the students were. And that's the kind of adaptation measure that we used. So it is a mixed methods research design. So we had data collection through an online self-report questionnaire. So you can see here just over 200 responses for those. And we've got NASCHOOL to thank for that, really. So she took charge very much of the data collection in Kazakhstan. We then also conducted a series of what we term individual life story interviews. So these were essentially semi-structured one-on-one interviews. However, we very much followed a biographical encounters approach here, which again was really to do with wanting to capture the students' full migration and really life history trajectory. And we analyzed those using thematic narrative analysis. I should also just briefly say we are still looking at the data. So the data analysis isn't completely final. So please take the results we're about to present now as emerging findings, really. Next slide, please, Sam. So in terms of the participant profile, just very briefly, you can see here amongst our questionnaire sample, most students were undergraduate, studying for undergraduate degrees. And that was because the vast majority of them went to Kazakhstan to undertake medical degrees. So often it's a bachelor of surgery, really, that they studied. More than half were first generation higher education students, which was interesting to us. And also, again, a majority were the very first in their families to study overseas. However, they did by and large identify as middle class. So we asked that as well in the questionnaire, just in terms of capturing the the demographic profile of these students. The interviewees were fairly young, as you can see, and they were all studying for a Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery. So that is sort of your classic medical degree. Okay, next slide, please, Sam. So key findings. So this is going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, so apologies in advance, but I'll just talk you through some of the key questionnaire data that we have looked at. As I say, we're still looking at it before handing back to Sam for the more qualitative data. So just to say, in the questionnaire, we used a range of pretty well-established pre-existing measures, from the literature, just to tease out a few interesting findings here. So you can see students scored slightly higher on academic adaptation as opposed to sociocultural adaptation. You can also see here that some of the lowest scoring items really were to do with instigating and maintaining social ties. Okay, I'll come back to that in a minute. We did have a little look across the literature to see how our student migrant scores compared with other samples. And you find both. They scored slightly higher than some student samples when it comes to academic adaptation, but also slightly lower compared to others. So it really depends on what you look at. And there is very, very limited literature of this kind regarding student migrants in Kazakhstan. We also found some interesting correlations between our outcome measures. Next slide, please, Sam. Now here I'll just tease out what we're interested in their subjective well-being, really. So we used the personal well-being index to gauge that. So we were interested in both their overall life satisfaction since becoming student migrants, as well as how they subjectively felt in themselves. Okay, so and again, on a 10-point scale here, you can see that by and large, I would say that is sort of that they felt well in themselves on the whole. But again, forming personal relationships was one of the lowest rated items here. And again, we found strong positive correlations between the psychological adaptation measures and the other ones, which isn't surprising because we know there is fairly robust evidence that they all link together and they all influence one another. Next slide, please, Sam. We measured sense of belonging as well. So again, here you can see we broke this down into things like self-confidence, engagement, and so on. I'm happy to come back to that in the discussion, but I just wanted to give you the kind of overall sense here. And again, sense of belonging correlated quite strongly with our other outcome measures as well. Next slide, Sam. I think this is the last one of the data bit. So social support actually was the one outcome measure where the student migrants didn't score particularly well. So I think I'll just draw your attention here to the graph on the right to see that when we calculated this, actually over half came under the poor social support category. So this was something we then went away and explored in our qualitative data. Thanks, Sam. Next one, please. Right, so just some emerging thoughts on the quant data. And I know this was quite a lot to take in, but essentially these are the key messages to take away for now. So overall, the adaptation scores were broadly in line with other studies. Okay, so they weren't particular outliers. Students did report having adapted better academically rather than socioculturally, and strong positive correlations between all these outcome measures, which is something we'll explore further. And as I said, relatively low levels of social support. So this sort of question of forming meaningful social ties, right, comes up again and again in studies of student migrants generally, as well as in this sample. So it is something we're looking at in a bit more detail in our qualitative data as well. I think it's back to Sam.
Okay, so just to explore a little bit of the qualitative data, I think to just add a little bit of, I guess, context to some of the issues that Alina has raised. We know, for example, that some of the issues around sort of rational choice decision making are actually a little bit criticised in the literature, but nevertheless, we really did feel that there was something quite significant about sort of an element of sort of the financial decisions around whether people chose to move to Kazakhstan to study or not. And so we can see there's an element partly of the financial nature of that and partly related to sort of more systemic challenges sort of in the home country education system in terms of actually sort of access to studying for a medical degree. And clearly quite interestingly, a very quite a strong sort of career mindset, ultimately, a very strong sense of vocation in terms of what these students ultimately planned to do. But I think it's fair to say that, whilst we know that, sort of the financial issues, were a factor in the decision making, whilst, the quantitative data tells us a little bit that, the adjustment to a new country perhaps was a little bit challenging, certainly perhaps for the newer students. There's an element of, within a longitudinal study, these things can change a little bit. But ultimately, there was absolutely a really strong sense actually of wanting to study in another country. It wasn't just about sort of those sort of financial factors. There was something very strong coming across around sort of new experiences and opportunities for personal growth as well, but also a real sense actually of that again, that vocational element of sort of wanting to give back to the home country in terms of ultimately returning to actually, then practice medicine. So I'm conscious of time, and I can't actually see the chair, so I'll just move on to the conclusions, if that's okay. So we did, there are these sort of key issues, really, just to summarize, really around, something really quite interesting about career aspiration, absolutely something around personal growth and that, that desire to sort of explore the world, and then obviously sort of challenges around the home system, obviously encouraging people then to sort of look further afield to study. So Alina and Nazkor may want to jump in here, but I think, as I say, the data is still, we're still in the process of the analysis really, but we do really think there is something absolutely critical around sort of that humanizing of student migrants. And thinking a little bit about that difference between experience and practice, and sort of unpicking that a little bit in terms of actually what students do in reality and how they make sense of their experiences. We do think it's thinking very much about how we work with students, and we do think the work around biographical encounters is quite helpful for that. And we also think that just understanding sort of these migratory profiles is really useful as well, just to give us some greater nuance, I think, in our analysis, going back to the points we made at the very start of the presentation. And also, I think just to really say that, we're quite keen to think about, how we unpick, sort of the way in which we've sort of designed our questionnaire, thinking quite carefully about those quant principles, thinking about sort of terminology in particular as we sort of collect that data. And ultimately, hopefully, what we're really trying to do is actually offer a wider contribution to that sort of diversification of voices in relation to sort of HE contexts that were actually, a little bit peripheral, that we're, just a little bit less sure about. I think we might have run out of time. I don't know if Alina and Nazca want to add anything.
Apparently, we've got 5 minutes left according to the chat.
Great.
So that's great. So maybe Nazca, do you want to come in maybe for the conclusions, given that you actually operate in that context?
The data for us, yeah.
Okay, thank you. A little bit. I think humanizing and some low social support. From my point of view, I think it's can be explained by language barriers, unfortunately, in Kazakhstan, and how students told me explained very low level of English. And from their point of view, it's very difficult to study Russian or Kazakh. Anyways, they studied only 1 year, first year, and so and very difficult. And I think they feel isolation and troubles and barriers in communication.
Thanks,
so it was very interesting. To collaborate in this research. Mm-hmm.
And I think that is it's just to add maybe to what Sam said before here, that and what showed in our both in our qual and quant data actually, I guess the difficulties in terms of forming meaningful social ties with members of the host community, that is not unique to Kazakhstan. I think that's really important that we emphasize that. That is something where we have quite compelling evidence actually, that happens across higher education contexts. I think it's just that having some insight into, I think, this quite unique migration flow, I suppose, from the Indian subcontinent to Kazakhstan to us was quite intriguing, because obviously Nazgul, she works in that context, and then for Sam and I think we've just been researching other contexts, kind of the typical historic destination countries like the Anglophone countries, whereas Kazakhstan seemed to us really important as a sort of hub in Central Asia, and an aspiring higher education, hub there. And then this particular link with India in particular in the medical context, I think was just something that we came across in the literature a little bit. But as we said in the conclusion here, this last point, I think, we just know that certain higher education contexts in the student migrant literature continue to be on the periphery. So it was really important for us, I think, to get some mixed methods perspective, because the data that is out there and is published quite often is either or. So there is a fair bit of qualitative data out there, qualitative studies. There isn't necessarily all that much in terms of looking at the two, and we just thought, in order to humanize the student migrant experience, right, you really need both. So we didn't want to just go out and collect quantitative data, because as you've seen, like in the way I presented it very quickly earlier, that isn't necessarily a sort of a very humanizing view. It's very numbers driven. But I think just having some outcome measures to compare to previous studies alongside the student migrant voices was kind of, I guess, the rationale for the study was really that, and then moving away from simply looking at it through the experience lens, because that is increasingly now critiqued in literature as something that neglects a little bit that actually student migrants are agents and are very kind of active in their decision making, and so we are increasingly, I think, now in this study, as we go through the analysis, shifting away from the experience lens actually to the practices lens, because it just acknowledges a little bit more, I think it's fair to say, that there is this agency in student migrants, and they are not just passive, victims of culture shock, so to speak. So this is just maybe a little bit more here in terms of the conclusions. So I don't know if either Sam or Nazca will have any more they want to add here.
I think that's great. Thanks, Alina. Maybe we'll pick up and see if there's any questions. So yeah, just to give you our references. Yep, and just obviously feel free to contact us as well, and the references are there. But thanks everyone. Hope we've got some opportunity for some questions before the next paper.
Brilliant. Thank you for a really interesting and detailed presentation. It's fantastic. Thanks. And perfect timing, literally to the second. So thank you so much. So yeah, as we said, we've got 10 minutes for questions. So happy to open questions. Please feel free to put them into the chat, or if you're more comfortable using voice, either put your hand up, we can activate your camera and microphone, and it'll be great to have any questions. Over to you all. Yeah, of course.
Hi. So thank you so much. That was so fascinating. And I had many thoughts, but I guess one of my questions was that with these kind of medical destinations outside India, there's often a poor rate of success in passing the exam to come back and practice in India. And I was wondering, I'm not aware of how it is with the students who go to Kazakhstan, but I know with China and Russia, very few people actually are able to pass that exam to come back and practice. And I wanted to know if you had any sense from the students about anxieties, about whether this kind of alternative route to becoming a doctor will be able to be converted into a medical position in India, since you said they wanted to come back there. So I guess I was kind of curious about whether there were any anxieties there. And then a second very minor reflection was that I find it so interesting how there are certain destinations that have become sort of disciplinary niches. So certain countries are really popular only for certain disciplines. And I see that as well with my research of Indians going to Germany. It's almost exclusively engineers. It's an offbeat destination, but onbeat for engineers. And I thought that was an interesting dynamic. And I wondered if there were any Indians studying any other subjects. So yeah, I guess those are my two sort of questions. But thank you so much. I really enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you. I think Nazgul, I don't know if Nazgul's obviously the expert in the Kazakh context. I mean, I can just very quickly respond to your first question, Zazana, which is, I think just from memory, as I went through the qualitative data, there was, as Sam has said before, there was definitely a sense of, I think that the drive to go back to India and practice as a doctor there was definitely a key motivator. So I think that was very clear in the data. And I don't know whether that reflects with Nazgul's kind of lived experience as an educator, but a little bit for sure, I think an awareness did come through in the interviews around then having to really, you know, pass to them practice in India and making sure to kind of hit those standards to be able to practice in India. And obviously before going to Kazakhstan, there was a lot of discussion around not being able to pass the entrance exam to go to Indian higher education institutions, the state ones anyway. And then so it was definitely there, and I think we're still looking at that a little bit, but I think it is coming through that certainly the students have an awareness of that. But I'll see if Sam or Nazgul have any more to add to that.
No, I think that's great. Thanks, Selena. I think we did certainly pick up a little bit in the call data around people sort of talking about you know, sort of doing their prep for the exam when they returned, and sort of, yeah, absolutely that conscious awareness. And like Alina says, that really strong sense of actually, you know, absolutely wanting to go back, you know, to their home country to give back as medical practitioners. So yeah, I think that came across really strongly. But I don't know whether Nazgul, obviously, you know, as you know, as sort of the key person, can really add to that. Nazgul, is there anything you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, maybe, yeah, according to my experience and a lot of conversation with Indian students, mostly, yeah, vast majority from India. And how they explain, yeah, they are very motivated, because I think in India they have more opportunities for career, and in Kazakhstan some maybe Soviet practices still, when doctors unfortunately low paid still. and now we have some economic problems again. So, and yeah, they are motivated, and when they back to India, they take Medical Council of India exam, very difficult, and they started to prepare here, almost from first or second year. Our university invited professors, trainers, and so on, and most different data. But in general, how our international faculty explained, around 30% of students take this difficult exam from first attempt, and it's a high percentage, and maybe this also some criteria why our university may be attractive for the students. And yeah, and according to our dean, last year, he explains that anyway, majority of our graduate students in India goes to internship. Maybe around between 80–90%. So yeah, they not only study for obtaining diploma, also they prepare to next stage in India to take. But this year, I was told that anyway, some Indian students also back to internship. Maybe also it's explained with financially, maybe, yeah, again, in Kazakhstan, it's cheaper. I don't know how many, 5 or 6, but my colleagues told that some students, yeah, some back, but I'm not sure that they will stay here because to compare, unfortunately, our doctors payment much lower than in India.
Thanks,
so,
Nazko. I think that's really, really helpful, sort of additional
yeah.
sort of context, I think, really fleshing out some of the data. And I think just back to that other point around disciplinary niches, I really like that phrase, disciplinary niches. I think that's really interesting. And yeah, we are aware of that literature around the attractiveness of Germany for particular students from particular countries in terms of engineering. And I think it'll be interesting to see, you know, as we sort of see these sort of emerging sort of higher education hubs, whether we get sort of more work which actually, you know, focuses on sort of that disciplinary niche rather than sort of a general sort of broader trajectory to those countries. So yeah, that's a really great phrase. I really like that. Thanks for that.
Brilliant. Thank you. We've got time probably for one more question before we move on to our second presentation. Are there any other questions from anyone at all? If not, I've got a sneaky quick question, just I'm quite curious, but anyone else can go first.
There is some technical problems.
A quick question from me then, if there's no one else. One of the things I'm really interested in is the application of research. I'm just curious to see, have any sort of discussions or dialogue started happening about how these sorts of findings can then be explored and potentially used to support students as they're studying those sorts of things happening, and how that's the research is translating into potential change.
Yeah, I mean, I'll quickly respond to that one, Sam, and Nazgul, if you don't want to add to it. I mean, I think one of the things we've done, to be honest, Mark, with this particular data, because we're still analyzing it and writing up the actual paper, we've not necessarily done anything with that yet, but some of the previous research I've done has fed into very local activities, I have to say, at Newcastle University, where we designed some, what do we call them, sort of intercultural communication workshops for students, actually, with some funding from UKISA, which is the UK Council for International Student Affairs. So it was sort of an initial trial that could inform, I guess, sort of wider provision of intercultural communication.
I don't know if that's my internet shot's gone down. Or...
Oh, can you still hear me?
Yes, yes. I think, yeah, maybe in our higher education, very low level with student working, maybe like some, anyway, Soviet patterns remain. Yeah, I think, yeah, they're isolated and yeah, communicate inside their community. Maybe, yeah, with other Indian students from who study in Almaty or Astana or in the Western Kazakhstan also. Unfortunately, I don't know what kind of picture in Kazakhstan on Indian students, how many, but mostly, yeah, they study in medical universities. And yeah, medical classical degrees only. So yeah, I think our university is reforming very slowly, and it's not only about Indian students. I think also about local students and about retention, social support.
Yeah, I think that's really, I think we're conscious of, yeah, I just think if people want to contact us, just let us know. We're happy to put our emails in the chat if anyone wants to talk about it anymore. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you all. And yeah, that's a really good suggestion. Actually, if you want to put your emails into the chat, I'm happy to share. That would be great. It'd be always good to have sort of continuing discussion. Much appreciated. So if you want to join me just to say thank you to our three presenters, very much appreciate a really great presentation and excellent questions as well. Thank you all. Okay, I'd like to hand over to our second presenter who's lined up already, which is brilliant news. So we've got a talk on undercover experts, how new forms of education consultancy on social media mediate student migration from India to Germany. Welcome to Shazna, apologies, who's going to be presenting this. Again, a 20-minute presentation. There'll be time for questions as well. Over to you.
Can you see my screen all right?
I can indeed, yeah.
Brilliant.
Perfect.
Okay, so you'll see I've changed the title slightly, but it's the same presentation largely. So to begin with a little bit of context, I'm sure, again, people are broadly aware of this literature, but I'm going to be focusing on this kind of migration infrastructure concept. So international student migration is mediated by a very complex infrastructure that's composed of a number of interlinked actors, networks, and technologies. And there's been a lot of research in recent years that has been examining different dimensions of this infrastructure. So for example, there's been research on the social infrastructure or prospective international students' social networks and the huge impact that this infrastructure can have on whether prospective international students decide to go abroad to study and also their study destination. There's also been more and more research about the commercial infrastructure and the kind of pivotal role education consultants or agents can play in facilitating international student mobility. What has been less studied, however, are new infrastructures of mobility that have developed on social media and their implications for international student migration. So this paper is going to contribute to addressing this gap through examining new forms of study abroad expertise on social media and their role in mediating postgraduate level student migration from India to Germany. More specifically, I'll be discussing how Study in Germany mutual support Facebook and WhatsApp groups that were used by prospective international students in India, as well as Study in Germany YouTube channels that were run by Indian international students in Germany, have contributed to the emergence of new forms of education consultancy. So this paper draws on research that I am conducting about student migration from India to Germany. The number of Indians studying in Germany has been steadily increasing in recent years, and the majority are enrolled on engineering programs. So back to this disciplinary niche. Since 2018, I've been conducting various phases of ethnographic fieldwork and also interviews that have focused on the migration infrastructures and the aspirations that are facilitating Indian student migration to Germany. In this paper, I'm going to be focusing particularly on digital ethnographic research that I've conducted within 4 Study in Germany YouTube channels and 15 Study in Germany Facebook and WhatsApp groups. So a major finding from this project was that the majority of my interlocutors, that is prospective international students in India, experienced the process of applying to study in Germany as being extremely complicated and stressful. Most did not have people within their social networks who could provide them with the kind of support and the kind of guidance that they felt they needed. In this context, Study in Germany Facebook and WhatsApp groups had come to be seen as a really important tool for navigating the process of going to Germany for study. These groups brought together prospective international students in India who were previously unknown to each other and were interested in studying in Germany. So at the time of my fieldwork, there were several large Facebook groups that were focused on study in Germany, and also dozens of really specialized WhatsApp groups for people who were interested in applying to particular universities and courses. And most of my interlocutors were members of 1 or 2 Facebook groups and several WhatsApp groups. So these online groups functioned really as a community of practice, with members actively collaborating and supporting each other through the process of applying to German universities and also organizing to go to Germany to study, select the visa and the travel arrangements. Very strikingly, an ethic of encouragement and support characterize these groups. So even though group members were often in direct competition for places at universities, they appeared to view each other as allies. They readily shared information with each other, and they celebrated each other's victories. Some group members, alongside their participation in the groups, were seeking or had sought the services of a commercial education consultant based in India. Nevertheless, when consultants were discussed in these groups, they were typically portrayed as being very ambivalent actors. So on the one hand, education consultants were discussed by some group members as being established sources of expertise when it came to study abroad. On the other hand, many viewed consultants as engaging in very unethical and manipulative practices in order to further their business interests, even when these might be in conflict with their clients' best interests. In fact, a really strong anti-consultant narrative had crystallized in these Facebook and WhatsApp groups through posts that were written by members in which they detailed their very negative experiences with particular consultants, and then other members' reactions to such posts. However, apart from being mutual support groups, and despite the very strong anti-consultant narratives that circulated within them, the Study in Germany Facebook and WhatsApp groups I studied were also marketplaces where study abroad expertise could be bought and sold. After spending significant time in these groups while navigating the process of going to Germany for study, some group members, whom I will call student guides or SGs, began to offer other group members assistance with this process for a fee. While in most cases, SGs were current students or recent graduates living in Germany, some were still advanced stage applicants themselves. So over the course of my fieldwork, I came across and I also interviewed 6 SGs. It was really difficult to get an estimate of the total number of SGs that were operating in these groups because they were typically undercover. And I will come back to this point. So on the face of it, the services that SGs offered were quite similar to those offered by traditional education consultants in India. So they would help applicants shortlist universities, they would help them prepare their applications, some would also help with visas and travel arrangements. However, SGs also differed from consultants in India because the study in Germany, Facebook and WhatsApp groups were very strongly implicated in how they operated. So most of the SGs I interviewed credited the groups, the Facebook and WhatsApp groups, with having helped them acquire expertise in the application process. So the large amounts of time which most of them had spent in these groups, typically when they themselves had been applicants, asking and answering questions, viewing other members' questions being answered, and participating in discussions, were all experienced as having served as an important part of the training through which they had developed their study abroad expertise. In addition, very importantly, all credited the groups with making them aware of the fact that their own lived experience of the application process, and in most cases also of studying and living in Germany, was highly sought after and could have monetary exchange value. Moreover, SGs recruited their clients through the groups. Entering a Facebook group or a WhatsApp group gave these SGs access to a large number of aspirant student migrants, that is, their potential clients, all conveniently grouped together. The existence of such groups, which brought together people from all over India, meant that SGs could have an extraordinarily large geographical reach. So sitting in Hamburg, one of the SGs I interviewed had clients from cities, towns, and villages all over India, and also some clients from Pakistan, Afghanistan, and several African countries. Finally, the norms of altruistic exchange within the groups and the related anti-consultant narratives strongly shaped how SGs operated. So because these groups were characterized by an ethic of altruistic peer support, SGs needed to operate according to this logic in order to be able to recruit clients. So SGs did not and could not directly market themselves in these groups. SGs who directly advertised their services faced a lot of backlash. Instead, most SGs first perform their knowledge and expertise through being a good group member and sort of answering all the group members' questions and becoming very present and visible in this way. And then after they would become visible like this, they would then offer via private messages to individual members further support for a fee. SGs also took great pains to distance themselves from traditional education consultants in India. And this was done in 2 main ways. The first way was by emphasizing their student identity in opposition to consultants who were discussed as being businesses. As businesses, consultants were framed as being very profit-driven and manipulative. In contrast, SGs presented themselves as being very genuine and having a friendly desire to just help fellow students make use of this opportunity of going to Germany for study. A second way in which SGs distanced themselves from education consultants was by stressing their insider knowledge of the application process to German universities, their insider knowledge of the German higher education landscape and student life in Germany, which they presented as stemming from the fact that they were or had been international students in Germany and also engineering students themselves, unlike consultants who they argued typically did not have a first-hand experience of engineering courses or of study and life in Germany. So in the conceptualizations of study abroad expertise that were prominent within these student communities online, it was student or near student status and a lived experience of study abroad, rather than professional expertise that were associated with trustworthy and accurate study abroad related guidance. So now let's move on to another kind of study abroad expert on social media, another kind of new form of education consultancy. And by this, I mean study in Germany YouTubers. So over the last 10 years, there has been a growth of international students and recent graduates who have built really large followings on social media through the content they create on studying in Germany. And the majority of them are largely producing this content on YouTube. While the SGs that I just discussed operated undercover, it's the opposite with the study in Germany YouTubers. The most popular among them occupied almost a celebrity status among prospective international students in India. The style of education consultancy that these YouTubers offer is also very different from that offered by SGs and also by the traditional education consultants in India. So today I'll be presenting just a very quick case study about the first Indian study in Germany YouTuber. His name is Bharat. This is him. He started making content on study in Germany back in 2017 when he was a master's student at a German university. And he now has close to 400,000 subscribers, and his videos have been viewed close to 40 million times. Now, Bharat has gained his large following based on the free YouTube content he produces on the German higher education landscape and also on the process of applying to study in Germany. So in this content, he explains the distinctions between different categories of German universities. He talks about how to write a statement of purpose. He explains about the process of getting a loan, how to buy health insurance, and so on. In these videos, he also often answers his viewers' questions, and he addresses topics that have been raised in the comments section. So he's in kind of regular dialogue with his viewers. The media-rich content that YouTube affords also means that viewers can actually virtually visit Germany through Bharat's channel and see what universities, student accommodation, and everyday life in Germany can look like. The videos that Bharat makes circulate through the Study in Germany Facebook and WhatsApp groups, and Bharat also runs his own such Facebook and WhatsApp groups. And a whole community of prospective international students have developed around his channel in these groups. Bharat plays a very important role in shaping his viewers' perceptions of Germany, as well as their aspirations to study there. And he does this through the content that he produces focused on Germany, through videos in which he collaborates with YouTubers in other countries to compare their respective study destinations, and also through videos in which he offers lengthy critiques of other study destinations. Research has shown how higher education institutions and state educational bodies are involved in constructing national brands in order to attract international students to a particular study destination. And we may see YouTubers like Bharat as being important unofficial agents of nation branding. Now, all the credibility that Bharat has acquired through the free content he produces and the relationship that he has cultivated with his viewers over time has created opportunities for monetization. Like other YouTubers, the strategies of monetization he draws on are more characteristic of the influencer industry than the migration industry. So Bharat partners with the providers of various services that are relevant to Indians studying in Germany. For example, health insurance providers. And then he makes videos about these products and services for his channel. He also offers paid products and services himself, from appointments with him where you can discuss your study plans and get his opinion, to an online course where he guides you and supports you with the process of applying to Germany and also with managing your studies once in Germany. In a video in 2021, he said that he had 2,000 students that were enrolled in this course. And that is equal to 7% of the total Indians that were studying in Germany that year, which kind of gives you a sense of what an important part of the migration infrastructure this one YouTuber is. Like many other study abroad YouTubers, Bharat also distances himself from traditional education consultants in India. Like the SGs, he views first-hand experience of study abroad as being much more authentic and accurate than professional expertise. He also sees himself as being more of an educator and someone who kind of coaches his clients through the process of going to Germany to study, rather than someone who will simply do the process for them, which is the service he sees education consultants as offering. So to conclude, this paper has examined new intersections between the technological, social, and commercial migration infrastructures mediating international student migration. Francis Collins argues that in migration scholarship, a distinction is often drawn between agents who are viewed as being very profit-oriented and part of the migration industry, and intermediaries who are seen as operating within the social networks of migrants and are seen as being very altruistic. In contrast, he shows how the Korean education agents that he studied could be seen as operating between these two worlds. Similarly, I would argue that the study in Germany Facebook and WhatsApp groups, as well as the YouTube channels, may be seen as offering SGs and study in Germany YouTubers an unprecedented way and place in which to cultivate social capital and become really embedded in the networks of prospective international students, which then opens up very valuable opportunities for commercialization and commercial endeavors. It should be emphasized, however, that for both SGs and YouTubers, commercial motives existed alongside other ones. So for example, both SGs and YouTubers appear to derive a great deal of satisfaction from occupying this role of a higher education expert, and also from supporting other Indians to access study abroad by providing guidance and insider information, which many of them might not have been able to access otherwise. So to conclude, this paper has demonstrated the agentic and active role that international students and even prospective international students are playing in creating infrastructures of student mobility. I will stop there. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you for a fantastic and again, perfectly timed presentation. Much appreciated. We've got time for questions. So over to anyone who has any questions.
Okay, maybe because same with Indian students experience. I also can tell that our Indian students also have YouTube channels, but very small.
Okay.
Yeah, very small, very small. I think several hundreds maybe subscribers. I didn't see analytics, but my question, it's not clear for me. It's not commercial, yeah, not consultancy or maybe information about studying Germany. How many people used or maybe 2,000? It's 1 year or in general? yeah,
with that one YouTuber.
what results? Yeah.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I just was able to, he mentioned the number of students in that one video, and he hasn't mentioned it again, though he says it keeps growing. So I'll have to do an interview with him to find out the current total number. But I found it really striking that one person is such a huge kind of node. And I've also seen students write in the comment sections of his videos that I went for my visa interview and they asked me, you know, where I got information on study in Germany. And I mentioned your YouTube channel, and the visa person said, oh, everyone mentions him. And the Goethe Institute language teacher said, oh, your pronunciation is so good. Where did you learn German? They said, oh, I learned it on his online course. And they're like, oh, everybody's doing that course. So I find it really crazy, the kind of big node an individual student has become. I see a question from Samantha in the chat. Do universities in the long term co-opt these YouTubers to market their courses more directly? So I think Germany is an interesting case because the education is free, even for international students. There isn't this kind of desire to recruit students. But I know that Barrett's University, in the Technical University of Hamburg, was very fascinated by the huge increase in applications to Hamburg. And they could see that came from him. And so they kind of met with him and they said, you know, maybe you can do some videos introducing our university and kind of making people aware of it. And, you know, if they have questions, we can answer them through you. So it's not this kind of UK marketized, how do we get them? But we see, I think even at the time Barrett started, India and Germany, the Indian students in the German universities, both didn't quite understand each other. German universities were also not really sure about the Indian higher education system. They didn't know the equivalence. And so, because they also don't partner with education consultants. And so they found YouTubers like Bharat quite an interesting intermediary to be a kind of translator. So yeah, it was not the kind of co-opting to market, but more a sort of help us understand each other a bit better kind of thing.
Can I ask a quick one as well? Just I was really interested in the you know, the bit where you talked about the student guides,
Yeah.
the kind of informal. I wondered, do you have any sense in any of your data at all about how students feel sort of afterwards, once they've arrived in Germany? Do they reflect at all on, you know, does what they have learned through these student guides or through YouTubers, does that match their lived experience following their arrival? So that's, to me, that is quite interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think, first of all, I find the YouTubers, on the one hand, you know, they really are widening participation, I feel. But on the other hand, they do really create this neoliberal responsibilizing the students. Like, if you want to be successful, it's up to you. If you want to integrate, you better learn German and you better find a way to integrate. And so it's really this kind of removal of all the kind of structural things that could make adjustment in Germany and the student experience in Germany a little bit difficult. So I think people sometimes feel nervous to talk about difficult experiences. I know that many people do struggle with making friends with German students. They come imagining that they're going to be in this international atmosphere, but they end up in an international course, which is 99% Indians. And they just really don't have a way of kind of reaching these Germans who they really want to be friends with. And many of them have had experiences with just not being able to form real friendships with the Germans. And they also often struggle a lot with getting internships and jobs. And so there are problems. And I do feel there is, through the YouTube channels, a bit of blaming of individuals rather than kind of highlighting broader structural things that might not be working, which might silence people from coming back to that YouTube channel and complaining that this is not what I imagined. having said which, I've also seen with my own eyes success stories. People who have just blossomed in Germany. They were struggling in India. Like the medical exam, there's an engineering exam in India which no one can pass. It's a nightmare. And now they're in Germany. They're doing their dream job at Bosch. It's kind of all happening for them. So you have a very mixed experience.
Thank you.
Can I ask a short question? It seems that it's very big channel, Bharat, yeah? Germany. How possible he works or manage this channel alone, or maybe some team?
Good question.
Team? Yeah.
Yeah. So he started all alone. Sometimes his wife was his cameraman. Sometimes he had a tripod. But now he has a team, I think, of about 12 full-time employees.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that's brings us to the end of that one, and thank you again for an excellent presentation and questions and answers as well. So if you again join me and say thank you once more, either chat, wave, whatever it would be, just to say thank you for a brilliant presentation and discussion. Yeah, thank you to all our presenters and colleagues listening as well. It's been a really interesting and great set of presentations and discussions, and thank you all. So looking at the time, we've got about 50 minutes of a break, which is good news. And then the next sessions start at 11:45. So have a great rest of conference. Great to meet you, see you all. And yeah, thank you again. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.